Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you here all in the morning for the lecture by Kalina Bertin on her journey with her project ManicVR and also her personal journey because Manic is actually her reflection on the situation in her family, because both her siblings are suffering with the bipolar disorder, and Kalina decided to reflect on this through her internationally acclaimed film Manic, which was going around the festivals for a while, and it was released in 2017, and a year later was accompanied by the VR piece called simply Manic VR. If you didn't see it yet, I recommend to check it in an interactive program of the One World Festival in the Docs Gallery. You can try it there. And Kalina here today will be telling us more about her journey with this project, how to approach the mental illness through new medium of VR, what were the problems that she has to face, some ethics, how to treat people with mental disorders or mental illnesses through VR, and also in broad sense how VR could give us a tool how to treat mental illnesses and how to use it for greater good. So I will pass my word now to Kalina. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us this morning. So my name is Kalina Bertin. I'm a filmmaker based in Montreal, Canada. I'd like to thank the festival and thank EastDoc for having me here and giving me an opportunity to talk about a subject matter that's very close to my heart, bipolar disorder. I'm really happy to explore with you today the creative process of making ManicVR, and I'll also address how virtual reality is becoming an emerging tool to treat mental health disorders. ManicVR is a virtual reality experience I directed. I just want to quickly acknowledge the really wonderful team that I worked with, because to build such a complex interactive piece, you really need some great collaborators. So the creative direction team was composed by Sandra Rodriguez, Nicolas Roy, Fred Cassia. The piece was produced by I Still Film and DPT, and it was funded by the Canada Media Fund and Super Channel. So ManicVR explores the world of bipolar disorder through a series of voicemails that my siblings left me over the course of 3 years. The project had its world premiere at Sheffield DocFest, so in June, and it's been doing really well. It's been touring. It went to Taipei. It was then in London, in Camden, and I was just presenting the project in Berlin just now. So before I get into ManicVR, I really have to talk about Manic, which was the linear traditional documentary film that I made, 90-minute film, because it was really the genesis of the VR piece, and it gives context regarding what it was like as a filmmaker to transition from working with a linear narrative to then working with experiential and interactive narrative. But it also kind of sheds light on how two very different approaches can emerge from one same subject. So Manic chronicles my struggle to make sense of the legacy of mental illness in my family, and convinced that my father holds a key piece to the puzzle, I set out on a journey to find the truth about him, and I discover a man known alternately as a cult leader, a scam artist, and a father of 15 children. So it was quite a very intense process. It took 4 years to put together. The film explores two narratives. So on one side, there's that investigation to piece together my father's life, and on the other side there's my attempt to decipher and understand the mood disorder that's plaguing my siblings' lives. But as the film evolves, bridges are built between the two narratives, and then past and present collide to shed light on the legacy of mental illness in our family. So let's take a look at the trailer of Manic the documentary.
I have been watched for the past almost 2 months now. I was taking photographs and I saw these ghosts. It would look like we were like spirits.
Okay, another race, you guys. Ready, set, go.
Dad was larger than life.
His mission was to bring together a group of people He said, I'm building this temple. He called it a temple.
I looked him in the eye and I said, is he Jesus?
I heard people call him Sean, Daniel, George.
Your dad was very, very good at convincing people to do things that they might ordinarily not do.
He had different identities. He was living different lives. We're still putting the pieces of the puzzle together. I'm a bit concerned about you. Are you going to be okay?
I'll take my meds.
For me to help you, you have to tell me what's going on in your mind.
It's my destiny. It's my mission. I'm an angel. These galaxies, these ethers, the volcano. It's in my way.
Across the years, I will walk with you. And when our time on earth is finished, and on heaven too, I will take your hands.
It's nice to see actually something come out of all this madness.
So as my brother says, indeed, it was really nice to see something come out of all of this madness. I'll talk about how Manic became like a cathartic process for the whole family a little bit later. But the film took 4 years to make, and the length of that process really allowed me to capture my siblings as they would gravitate and navigate through various and changing states of mania, psychosis, and then reclaim solid ground once again. So I'm going to show you, since I have time today, I'd like to show you some excerpts of my sister. My brother's a little bit more of a complicated character just to show excerpts. You really have to see the film to build up towards his states because they're a little bit more intense. But I'm going to show you excerpts in which you can see my sister as she's moving towards the manic phase.
It's really not a big deal, but sometimes it seems like a big deal.
What?
Like how I manage my space, my living space. I just feel like I'm so, you know what I mean? I'm so influenced by the way Dad kind of, you know, carried his clutter around. In one way, it's like I feel like I thrive on it, you know? It creates an atmosphere for me to, you know, start painting or writing or, I don't know, it's just weird. It's just really weird, but I feel really, really haunted by these ghosts.
Just to get by, every day.
These paintings tell the story. The madness and love, the crazy love. This is what this is. These galaxies, these ethers, the volcano. It's in my way. You know, get this out of my way so that, you know, dégagez the place so that I can move forward. So it's like these tantrums. I fight myself, you know, I fight. I'm like, come on, let go, let this happen, and then boom.
For me to help you, you have to tell me what's going on in your mind.
Okay, I'll let you know what I'm thinking so that I can check with you what's true and what's not true.
Yeah. So we can figure out when it's a delusion or when it's real.
That would be awesome. That would spare me so much trouble because I feel so overwhelmed sometimes when it's not true and I believe it. I don't know why that happens.
Hi Hi, Kalina, it's me. I just want to let you know that they diagnosed me. I don't believe in putting definitions on people. I don't believe in putting a stamp on my forehead that says what I am.
I didn't sleep last night, and I probably won't sleep tomorrow night. It's my destiny. It's my mission. I'm an angel. This is what's happening.
Do that. You're already. She's already in mania. Okay.
I'm not already in mania.
No.
I'm just being myself right now. I'm just telling you that these are the messages that I've been receiving, that this is what I need to do.
No.
This is my mission.
Tapes. She's saying whatever, okay?
Are you joking? Or are you serious about all this?
Listen, I'm living in the moment right now.
So
this is what I'm receiving in the moment. That's all I can tell you.
I think she's in mania. I'm super serious.
She thinks that I'm nuts.
No, but serious. She's not even normal.
Okay, my mission is that I have been assigned by God. God is using me as his instrument. You know, St. Francis of Assisi says, "Lord, make me."
I wish I didn't have you as
make me. I know it's tough, but he says, "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace."
I just need to go like this, okay?
And so.
No, shut up, Mama. I don't want to hear this. It's so annoying.
I know it's annoying, but there's nothing I can do about it.
No, but
I tried everything I could to sleep last night.
I'm gonna explode.
Okay. All right. I'll just set this back. Whoops. Okay. All right. So obviously, when you get immersed into the film, it's a bit more easy to take in these changes. The bedroom scene can be a bit confrontational, but I don't know if you noticed already the changes in my sister's body. The eyes start to open up when she's painting, and then she starts having these delusions. I can talk a little bit more about what my sister's reaction was to watch this scene between her and her daughter. It was sort of a very important changing point in her life. But as you can imagine, seeing your loved ones change and transform in and out of these unseen worlds that are very true to them is extremely challenging. So filming became my way of coping with what was going on at home, but it also became my gateway into my siblings' world. The camera allowed me to ask questions that I never would have asked if it wasn't in my hands at that time. But I wanted to go further. I had a strong desire to understand what it was like from inside to live with such a complex condition. And as I was working on the documentary film, there was this growing sense of frustration because I was always from the outside attempting to look in. And I knew that would be the position of the viewer watching the documentary. There would always be outside. But what if the viewer could be inside of my siblings' world? What if I could experiment with an immersive medium that would give access to my siblings' inner landscapes, all in an attempt to shed light on this complex disorder. And this, for me, was also part of a process to develop tools to communicate further with my siblings, to try to support them in different ways. But what if this project could also become an interesting object for others who have similar conditions? What if it could open up a dialogue between themselves or their families and their loved ones? Because putting words to a complex condition like bipolar disorder is often very, very challenging. So VR became a very interesting medium for this, to create a truly immersive experience, to represent and explore my siblings' realities. And I was really fascinated with how embodiment, and how if it could generate a deeper understanding of this complex subject matter that's still widely misunderstood. So that's sort of how ManicVR came to exist. And if you will, let's take a look at the trailer of ManicVR.
Hi, Kalina. It's me. I think it started again.
Kalina, what do I do with this? The madness and love, the crazy love. This is what this is.
I had a magical belief that just like Jesus, I had supernatural powers. God had a plan for me.
Everything that has ever been is within us. Each soul can be free. Isn't that enough to just be alive?
It's very poetic. I was visited by all these spirits. That was strange. It's like if half of it is true and half of it is in my mind. The world becomes a scary place.
So it felt quite liberating from being in a position of capturing and then transitioning towards representing something that I couldn't really capture while I was doing the documentary film. But as I transitioned from working on this linear project to working on ManicVR, one of the first questions that I was confronted with, well, what is the core difference between traditional linear film projected onto a screen and virtual reality? And very quickly I came to realize that what really differentiates the two is a sense of presence that is gained in VR by shifting from a third-person view when you're watching a screen to a first-person point of view when you're immersed in an environment. So with its immersive 3D and 360-degree worlds, VR really explodes the frame that was so essential to cinema and defined cinema for over 120 years. The agency that the user gains over its environment and therefore the story is really one of the core elements of embodiment in VR. So all of these elements were really going to affect the storytelling techniques that we would be using to put this piece together. And because I felt that 360 video capture still contains many interactive limitations, it still represents in many ways the dynamics of the screen. You can't pierce through the screen. So we felt that computer-generated images in 3D and 3D animations were far more immersive for what we wanted to do. So we chose to program for the HTC Vive and the Oculus Rift, really aiming for a room-scale experience with interaction in real time. And what that means is basically you can walk in a room and you can interact with your surroundings, and the program is going to respond back in real time. So this is a photo of my brother Francois and Fatima, so my Felicia's daughter, and they have the Oculus Rift on so they can engage with the virtual world through the headset, and with the controllers they can interact and have an incidence on the world. And my sister was there that day too, and they were trying the experience for the first time, and they were really blown away by it. They were very excited. They thought it was really representative of their journey. I mean, of course it's a representation. We can't pretend that this is what bipolar disorder truly is. But what was quite magical was when my niece Fatima exited the piece, something had changed in her eyes, and she looked at her mother and she said, "So that's what it's like to be in mania." And for the first time, she understood what her mother had been going through throughout all of these times where she was just left to her own devices, you know, with her perception of the world as a child, to try to grasp. And my sister said, yeah, that's what it feels like. So VR can create these really interesting connections in that sense. But also, I think when you're dealing with subject matters that can be vulnerable, so in my case, two people having bipolar disorder. As a filmmaker, you have sort of a power over their story, and so reaffirming consent or checking in the consent periodically is so key and so important. And for me, it was also very important to have my siblings feel like they were incorporated in the creative process, because we were telling, I don't have bipolar disorder myself, so I wanted to make sure that this felt real to them, this felt close to home. So I'll show you a little bit later, you know, the creative art that we had drawn, and they were all part of that process of giving their feedback. And so this is the HTC Vive that we had for our installation at Sheffield Dockfest. So once we decided on the technical tools that would best serve the building of this project, the next big question became, well, how do you represent the world of bipolar disorder? And as I mentioned, when I was in the process of making the documentary, I was capturing reality. But with this VR piece, I would be in a different position. I would be representing a very complex reality. And because there was so much representation involved, we found it was important to consult psychiatrists and researchers, some who were working on psychosis-related projects, others who were really working specialized in bipolar disorder. And the idea initially was to see if we could collect data in order to build the foundation of the project, if we could anchor it in a scientific approach somehow. So throughout making the documentary film, I myself had read a series of books on bipolar disorder to really understand how it functioned, how it operated. But I also came to develop a really nice relationship with psychiatrists working at the Douglas Mental Health University Institute in Montreal, who were following and treating my siblings. And Sandra Rodriguez, who I mentioned was on the creative direction team and also produced the project, she initiated a relationship with researchers from the MIT McGovern Institute for Brain Research and Broad Institute, both in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So initially we wanted to see if there was any biometric data that had been collected from patients with bipolar disorder, and if it could be significant to compare that biometrics, those biometrics with the biometrics of users as they would go through the VR piece. So for example, by using EEG recording on the users as they went through the VR piece and then compare the biometrics? Or could we inject the biometric data in the visual patterns or the musical patterns of the piece? So we were looking at all those things. But when we met with specialists, I mean, I remember the first time I sat down with a psychiatrist, I was so excited because I thought science would have all the answers to what is this disorder and what happens in the brain. And it was so funny because they were like, okay, you have to know that actually science knows very little regarding what actually happens in the brain of a person who has bipolar disorder. They do know some things, but it's very little compared to what still needs to be understood and discovered. And there actually is no scientific consensus regarding the biometrics of people who have bipolar disorder. So that was kind of a pushback to that specific approach. But discussing with them, it became clear that there is a consensus regarding the fact that chronic illness shapes a person's view of the world. And our goal was really to raise awareness and generate empathy regarding this complex condition. So biometric data remained a bit too technical and didn't really achieve this, feed into this process anyway. But rather looking closely at the disorder itself and its recurring symptoms, we came to realize that bipolar disorder had sort of a built-in narrative structure. And what if we used that sort of natural narrative arc as the blueprint to really build this experience? Maybe there lied the key for the process. So before I go further, I think it's really important to mention that everybody has their own experience with bipolar disorder. So this piece is definitely my siblings' experience. And there exists a variety of different mood disorders. This is a page from a really wonderful graphic novel by American artist Ellen Farney. She herself has bipolar disorder, and she talks about her own experiences. It's full of humor. It's really wonderful. And here she maps out for us the different mood disorders. So there's bipolar type 1, type 2, cyclothymia, unipolar depression, dysthymia, and then she sort of maps it out on a merry-go-round, which is a really nice metaphor or comparison. So my siblings have been diagnosed with bipolar type 1, so it's really the spectrum of bipolar type 1 that we would be using to map out the whole piece. Because as I'm going to mention in a second, in bipolar type 1 you can experience psychosis, but it's not all people who have bipolar disorder who will have like visual and auditory hallucinations. So that's important to mention as well. So when you look at the details of the spectrum of bipolar disorder type 1, you can see that it sort of operates in terms of phases. We would be addressing them in terms of chapters coming from like a narrative perspective. So initially you have the phase of euthymia, which can be described as the state of stability for people who have bipolar disorder. There's hypomania, in which one can feel a heightening of senses, eating and sleeping patterns begin to be disrupted at that point. And then hypomania can escalate into mania. And in mania, one can feel a growing sense of ecstatic energy. Delusions of grandeur can occur at that point. There can be the emergence of a holy mission, a strong connection to God. And the universe seems to really be a recurring theme throughout a lot of books that I've read also of different manic episodes. And then mania can escalate into psychosis. And in psychosis, at that point, you can experience a complete disconnection with reality. There can be visual and auditory hallucinations that can occur at that point. Psychosis could be considered as the peak of the disorder because after reaching that point, a person usually experiences a downward spiral into depression. And then in depression, one can feel a growing sense of despair, and overbearing suicidal thoughts can occur at that point. But what was interesting was when talking with specialists and psychiatrists and other people who had bipolar disorder, they mentioned how challenging it was to experience each of these phases. But what seemed upmost overwhelming was the notion that all of these phases could reoccur again and again all throughout their life. That can be scary. Because it's not just you go through the cycle once and you're done, all these things can happen again. So along with the key phases of bipolar disorder type 1, we added a chapter that would address that concept of cycling specifically. So now that we had the structure of the experience, we needed to find elements to really flesh out each of these phases. And that's when the voicemails became really, really interesting. As maybe you noticed when I showed the trailer of Manic the documentary, there was some sound bites of the voicemails that were used and that were really interesting to play with, but there were so many more that we had in the editing room that just didn't find a home in the documentary film. So it was so fulfilling to give them a home in the context of the VR piece because they were very, very compelling. So trying to cope and make sense of the destabilizing effects of the disorder, my siblings would often call me as I was making the documentary film over the course of 3 years, and they would leave me these long and detailed messages as they would be cycling through the phases of psychosis, mania, and depression. So with our permission, we decided to use the voicemails as the building blocks to represent bipolar disorder type 1, and what was wonderful is that their voices became the user's guide into their world. Something interesting to note as well is when we were initially presenting this project and pitching it, one of the recurring questions that we received was, in the context of this piece, whose point of view is the user taking? Which is a legitimate question, which I think comes very often from the gaming industry, where you're often a character that has to fulfill a task. But it was definitely something to think about very carefully. We made the choice not to impose the user like a point of view related to a specific character, because we would be dealing with such a sensitive subject matter, mental illness. It was important to give the user freedom and latitude to project themselves by their own will into my siblings' perspective as they're experiencing the phases of bipolar disorder, or perhaps even into my own perspective, the sibling who's receiving these calls and who's attempting to imagine and make sense of what her siblings and her loved ones are going through. So initially, the user is a visitor into my siblings' inner worlds. We couldn't say, okay, in this experience, you are going to be bipolar. That would pose all sorts of ethical problematics, and we can't pretend that we can do that. So we really had to navigate those waters carefully. So now to talk about the interactive and the UX design that was developed for this piece. At the core of the bipolar experience seemed to be this notion, this tension between this impression of a gain of control, like in mania, for example, and then the reality of a loss of control that grows as the disorder progresses through each of its phases. So that notion and that concept of control would really be used in our interactive design. And so each phase of the disorder is represented through key interactive design inspired by this specific approach. So in hypomania, the user can gradually engage with its environment through gaze tracking. In mania, to illustrate that growing sense of control that a person feels over its environment, at that point, the hand controllers can be used to interact with one's surroundings. And then interaction is taken away in psychosis to really illustrate that disconnection and that loss of control that comes at that point in psychosis. And for me, it was really important that we try to develop interactions that were as intuitive as possible, which can be a real challenge. In order to really maintain the flow of the experience, which once again is really important to preserve embodiment in VR, I wanted to avoid there being any like writing directions or a voice telling the user what to do. So we really relied on haptic feedback, which triggers the user's attention to look down at its hands, which now have a form, and then you can interact with your surroundings. So we used haptic feedback. So creating immersive environments in VR. To visually flesh out each of the phases of the disorder, we created 6 immersive environments, which acted as milestones of the experience. And these environments were all based on the same fundamental blueprint, so anchoring them in a reality that would build, transform, and then collapse around the user. So when I talk about this blueprint, I'll show you in the concept art, but we sort of had the notion of the map of a room, and then there was elements that always were echoed back. So the bed is always at the same space. And then in the jungle, the bath is at the same space of the bed. There's a plant that's in the room that's at the same place as in the jungle, to try to always bring back this notion that you're in a room and your mind is actually traveling and voyaging. So the hospital room represents the state of euthymia, the bedroom in which colors gradually become more saturated, light seeps in, that represents hypomania. The exuberance and the ecstasy of the galaxy represents that ecstatic energy in mania. And then the jungle with its mystery, but then growing anxiety represents psychosis. And the isolation room with its walls gradually closing in on the user, and the water building around the user represents depression. And then there was that very challenging chapter of cycling, which we had to figure out how to actually represent. And we were actually very much inspired by Japanese artist Yayoi Kusama and the infinity mirror rooms that she creates. So I'll show an example a little bit later, but that's how we sort of were able to finally articulate visually how the cycling was gonna look like. So when we were conceptualizing these environments, it was really important to first articulate through concept art or mood boards. So this is an example of the mood boards that we were building for Mania, because world building can become quite expensive in VR. So it was really important to arrive to a certain consensus regarding the look and the feel of each environment initially on paper. So we built initially mood boards. And then this was some ideas that we had. Okay, is there hands in the context of the piece? Okay, what do the hands look like? What do they generate? So we're trying to think about, okay, energy, how can we represent this energy? There was this cosmic feel. And this is an example of Psychosis, which finally changed a bit. But we had this idea of, in Psychosis, the world falls apart. Everything is disintegrating. And then this was, on the left side, those are the infinity mirror rooms by Yayoi Kusama, which were quite inspiring. And here's some of the concept art. So we worked with Jean-Philippe Marcotte, who is in Montreal. We can't see really well. Can we turn the lights down for these slides, maybe? So initially, we had everything done in black and white to sketch out the environment. So that's the jungle. So as you can see here, the bed is at the same position as the bat. So we're trying to echo back each world, have little elements to ground them. And then we started adding colors. Okay, we can turn the lights up now. Thank you. So the other thing that I can address here is when building an environment or developing a UX design for VR, planning out in the production schedule, time to make various iterations can actually be key, because sometimes there are some ideas that seem really great on paper but might not actually work once you throw them in VR in the digital world. So it's important to think about that too. And then to actually build these worlds, we used Unity, which is a game designing software used a lot in the gaming industry. So exploding the frame that is so crucial to cinema was initially very frightening in the beginning. But while we were designing these immersive environments, I came to realize that there are tools that you can use as a director to really guide the user's point of view through the story. For example, by using spatialized sound, saturation and color, contrasts of light and shadow, but even movement within the environment. But I really think that the magic of VR is that as a director, you kind of have to surrender in the end, and because the user has the ultimate power to find and the freedom to find their own story. And I think that's truly the beauty and the poetry of VR, is that each experience will always be unique in that sense. So I was asked to address how virtual reality is becoming an emerging tool in the field of mental health. And indeed, for the past 2 decades, researchers have been exploring virtual reality's potential to help better understand and treat mental health disorders. In regards to VR addressing psychosis specifically, research has focused on the safety and the acceptability of the technology. So for patients, for example, if they're in a psychotic state, is it safe to put a headset on them? Research has also focused on neurocognitive evaluation, so the evaluation of memory, self-perception, and reality distortion in patients who have psychosis, and then the assessment of paranoid ideation and auditory hallucinations. Regarding the treatment of psychosis, researchers have developed a cognitive remediation therapy in VR to improve social skills and cognitive behavior, and to improve cognitive processes such as attention, memory, and social cognition. So according to Dr. Lucia Valmagia, who is a clinical psychologist and researcher at the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology, and Neuroscience, which is a school of King's College London. So according to her, VR enables researchers and clinicians to design realistic scenarios that can be used to assess an individual's real-time cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and physiological response to an environment. So the idea is to place an individual into everyday life situations that are represented in VR, and then to study the real-time deficits in their capacity to develop a relationship, and then their cognitive impairments as well. So this allows researchers and clinicians basically to address the manifestation of the disorder in real time, but also in a controlled environment. So that can be very, very interesting from the perspective of researchers and clinicians. So Dr. Valmagia and her team at King's College, they've been working specifically with VR to assess the psychological processes and the mechanisms associated with the onset and the maintenance of psychosis, so addressing voices and paranoia experienced by patients. They're also using VR to test a real-time response to new medication. So they'll give new medication to a patient and then put them in a VR environment and then monitor their responses. bus. What also is really interesting is that they're using cognitive behavioral therapy with patients, having them practice in VR situations that are particularly challenging to them. So for some patients, it could be overwhelming just to take the underground, to take the bus, or just to shop in a supermarket. So virtually, they recreate these environments and then have the patients practice before then practicing in a real supermarket and a real bus. So the assisted therapy involves recreating those environments. In the example that I'm going to show you, they've recreated a pub environment to help a patient assess his paranoid ideation.
If you feel uncomfortable at any time, please let me know and we can stop, okay? You can look behind you, you can look up or down. You are in it 360.
You have been invited to a party in the pub. Please join some of the guests and try to make an impression of what you think about them and what they think about you.
Hello. I'm not really good at this kind of thing, like approaching groups of people and talking to them, so it feels a bit awkward. Becoming paranoid with my mum, that was the first thing that happened, and then I started becoming paranoid about my sisters, my dad, you know, my friends, and then eventually I was paranoid about absolutely everyone. The good thing about getting treatment early is that, you know, if you can get it in the first few months of your psychotic state, it's better than waiting 3 years, because it's so stressful to go through psychosis.
Okay, I'll take you out.
Okay. Thanks. It feels real, like, it feels like I was going up to these people and trying to open a conversation, and like they'd have a funny reaction to me, or I heard someone say strange when I was talking, or they turned and laughed.
If you felt that it was difficult for you to cope when people were laughing, then we could make the laugh very little to start, and then as you practice, go up and up and up until there are a lot of people laughing. So that you get used to a situation which probably will never happen, but that prepares you for real life where it will be less.
I think that if I use this technology, it would make it a lot easier in real life to go into similar situations, because I've already been there before.
So it's really important in these contexts that the clinicians can have a form of control over the therapy, because it needs to be customized for each person's experience. Like she was talking about, okay, shifting the laughter. But yeah, it's really important you can't just throw a patient in VR. They need to be assisted and guided. And now her team are working on VR projects that will address body image and eating disorders, social functioning in autism, and also assess unconscious bias training for health professionals. There's also Oxford VR that are doing some really interesting work. So according to Dr. Daniel Friedman, which is a professor of clinical psychology at the National Institute of Health Research, and he's also a professor at the University of Oxford. So according to him, studies show that 3D virtual reality can trigger the same mental and physical reactions as in real life. I think we all kind of know this, that's why we're interested in it. But his approach is to recreate social events in a lab environment in order to assess psychotic symptoms and treat them. So still the same goal as what they're doing at King's College. Dr. Freeman has been working in VR since 2001. He's the founder of Oxford VR. And I'm going to show you one of their creations. You'll see, we can talk about it after.
Hi, I'm Nick. What's your name? It's a pleasure to meet you. You'll have noticed the screen hovering around. It'll display information about what you're doing and help you track your progress. In this program, you're going to try a series of tasks. Each session should last around 20 to 30 minutes.
So this is the virtual therapist that they have created to guide the patients through the programs. Obviously, there's a clinician there as well, but that's something that they're working on because sometimes accessibility of therapy, you can be put on a waiting list. So the idea also in developing this for them is accessibility, to get more patients to get treatment faster. So Oxford VR, they're addressing VR to treat psychosis, social anxiety, and fear of heights. So they work a lot with exposure therapy. In the example here, you're going to see, so this is a pure example of exposure therapy, somebody who has fear of heights, they're in VR initially, and they're working on overcoming these fears. So I'll show you just a little clip of a patient who he had severe fear of heights, and we see him before and after 8 sessions of VR therapy that were 4 hours over 2 weeks. So it seems challenging.
This would have been simply impossible 3 months ago. It would have been total avoidance. I wouldn't even have attempted this.
So that's really interesting. So that's quite interesting of the progress that's been made and just over VR. So there's also Virtually Better. They're based in the United States, and the University of Duke, they use a lot of their software. They have VR projects to address post-traumatic stress disorder. They have a full phobia section, so fear of storms, fear of flying, fear of heights. And they even have a program to treat addictions. So that's real interesting. So one last thing I wanted to address before I conclude. It's another form of computer digital therapy. It's not VR, but I can definitely see how it will find eventually its way into VR, and it's called avatar therapy, so it's not immersive. Avatar therapy was invented by Professor Julian Leff. Professor Tom Craig is currently the principal investigator of the Avatar project at King's College. So what's important to know about avatar therapy is, despite taking antipsychotic medications for several years, some patients still experience auditory hallucinations, so they'll still hear voices despite the medication. Avatar therapy can help them tame and confront these voices. So through computer-generated imagery, they'll create a representation of the face of the entity that speaks to the patient. They can also create a voice that's very close to their own experience, and exactly, creating a close match to their experience is really key here. And the avatar is controlled by the therapist. So we'll see a little example right here.
You're rubbish. You're rubbish. You're a waste of space.
Can you go away, please?
That's good, Lauren. That's good, but can you try and make it a bit stronger for me? Sit up, look at him, and tell him to go away, okay?
So this process allows the patient to dialogue with the avatar, enabling them to build confidence towards the entity and eventually become empowered. The therapy takes place over 6 sessions of 10 minutes, and in some cases, the patients had completely stopped hearing voices following the therapy. So that's quite revolutionary. So according to studies conducted at King's College, VR is a safe and well-tolerated tool to explore neurocognitive deficits in people who suffer from psychotic disorders. The use of the technology is still quite new, so studies are still in a very early stage, as we see, and it can't be determined as of yet if VR is actually more effective than other treatment programs that address the same purpose. So VR still remains a complement to existing care, but the positive results are quite exciting. So it will be interesting to see how embodiment through VR experiences can help treat mental health disorders through a scientific approach in VR, but also allow broader audiences to better engage with complex realities that surround us, but to which we might not be well acquainted with, either due to prejudice, circumstance, or even lack of education. So my hope is that ManicVR triggers a conversation and ignites a desire to understand more and go into more details regarding what bipolar disorder actually is. And I've really seen that spark lit in many people who came out of the experience. I think the challenge that we face now as creators is the sparse distribution opportunities in VR. So festivals and museums are a really good start to get content, to make content accessible, but as the technology is rapidly becoming more democratized, let's hope that creators can reach wider audiences. So my name is Kalina Bertin, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions regarding ManicVR. Thank you.
So we have a few minutes for the questions. So please, if you have any questions, raise your hand. If not, I will start. My question is, you were already mentioning that your siblings try the ManicVR and their reactions, but how other people, other users with bipolar disorder reacted to this?
Yeah, really interesting. Just yesterday at Berlin, at the Sharing Institute, ManicVR is playing there for the whole week, and there was a man who came in who had bipolar disorder. And he was so fascinated. He couldn't believe of what we were able to create. So far the response has been really good. I have the opportunity sometimes to travel with the piece so I can see firsthand. I can talk with people firsthand. But we also have a booklet that we leave, and we've had many, many testimonies of people saying, I have bipolar disorder, and this is a really interesting experience. For the first time, I can see like a representation of what I've gone through. I mean, like I said, of course, it's different for everybody, but there are recurring symptoms that help like patients relate to one another's experiences. And we've had psychiatrists also try the experience and thought that it was really, really well done, really accurately. I mean, if you, like I showed the graph, if you know exactly how bipolar disorder operates, you go into the piece and you're like, you know it right away. But even if you don't know anything about the disorder, you still get the sense of the highs and the lows. And there's certain elements that were created in the spaces that generate like a body experience. Like when you exit the room and you look down, you really feel like you're coming out of your body. We tried to represent also these feelings because we wanted it to avoid, at some point we were like, okay, should we label each phase so that it's clear? And we're like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to let the users just experience it on an emotional level. Yeah.
Questions, please? So I will follow up on this. Yeah.
So I was wondering about like the avatar. I get back to this avatar therapy.
Yeah.
Are there any like developments regarding the HoloLens? Because I find it like as a mixed reality experience even stronger. Like when we talk about the Terminal 3, I felt it was much stronger than in any other space because like the person becomes real somehow.
Yeah.
So is there Like, do you know any of developments about that?
No, it's still like really early development, the studies. So I haven't heard that they're working with the HoloLens, but I know that we initially kind of toyed with the idea, do we use the HoloLens? But it's just that when we were starting, you could only interact like this and it didn't feel that immersive. So it was a bit limiting, we felt, when we started like 2 years ago working on the project. So we just decided to go digital and like poetic and full imagery. But I definitely would like to take up the challenge of using like the HoloLens to work, because then you're in an actual space, and to represent like hallucinations can actually be quite interesting. So I think, yeah, working with mental health with the HoloLens, definitely I think there will be a future. But once the interactivity is tweaked, worked a little bit, so it's more immersive, yeah.
Hi, thank you for your masterclass. It was great.
Thank you.
I would like to ask more practical question about the funding. How did you finance the project, the ManicVR project?
Well, so the funding was attached to the documentary film. So we have the Canada Media Fund in Canada. So through Manic the documentary, we were able to trigger the budget for ManicVR. So that's how it worked. And then Super Channel, which financed the film and the VR piece as well, kicked in. So we're kind of lucky in that sense. But that's how it worked, yeah. In Canada, it's mainly governmental support through arts councils and stuff like that, yeah.
Please, more questions? Yes?
I also would like to thank you. It was extremely interesting for me. I would like to ask you, maybe if you are thinking about bringing ManicVR into Czech Republic, so maybe we can experience it too. And on what is it based? Like, what's well, now I cannot really explain myself. But like, what rules, for example, the festival, or like what base you have to be able to bring this project to some festival, for example, or something. And the second one is, since you showed like a lot of new approaches, like in this VR in 3D patients, if, for example, you and your siblings have been thinking about trying something like that to help them with their disorders. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Good question. So the piece is playing right now here at the festival. So you can come and try it here. It operates on either the Oculus or the HTC. And usually, yeah, well, like in Berlin, they didn't own a headset, so they rented. So you can rent a headset. You need a high operating computer. And then it can be done in pretty much any space. That's kind of the beauty of it. You don't need like a cinematic venue. You just install like the lighthouses, the computer, you plug everything in, and it's kind of like plug and play. So it's not that complicated, but you do have to rent the headset and a high operating computer. And then it's just a digital file. So it's not that complicated. And then your other question was, so in Canada, there are a few labs or clinics that are beginning to use VR, but it's not mainstream at all. I mean, we are thankful for the universal healthcare that we have in Canada, but I mean, getting treatment is still like a challenge. Like you'll be in an office with a psychiatrist. I mean, I've been to so many of those sessions with my siblings. It's like 15 minutes, checking the medication, okay, bye. Like no psychodynamic approach. Like if you want to get a therapist, my sister waited 2-3 years, then she went to private and it saved her life. So yeah, they're not really using it in the mainstream. But for me, the avatar therapy was like, wow. And when I showed it to my sister, she thought it was really interesting. But I mean, luckily, my siblings are doing really well right now. I think with bipolar, it's a huge process because it kind of happens in your life without a warning, and you don't really know what's happening to you because you feel great in mania, so you don't think you're sick at all. Maybe when you get into depression, you're like, oh my God, it's horrible. But you know, I was talking with a psychiatrist yesterday. We were giving a talk, a psychiatrist and she was saying if you ask any patients to take away the mania, they would never want to take away the mania because it's so fun. But then it's the depression that's hard. So it takes time sometimes to find like the right medication to stabilize, but it is possible, definitely. Something I like to say too, it is possible to have bipolar disorder and to have a very rich life. It's not a death sentence. It is possible to be healthy.
I will just add that you could experience the ManicVR actually as a part of the interactive program of One World in Doc's Gallery.
Yeah, I already found out. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Should have checked before.
Yeah, the film, as far as I know, it's not part of the program. just the VR.
But if you want to see it, I have, for anybody who's interested, I have these, you can watch the film. It's interesting. It's very two different experiences. In the film, you see my siblings. In the VR, you don't see them, so it's kind of an exercise of imagination. But yeah, some people prefer the VR, some people prefer the film. I mean, a lot of people appreciate both, but they trigger different states.
So please, questions, any? Yes? Wait for the microphone, please.
You briefly mentioned at the beginning the process of doing this being cathartic for you as someone that is experiencing it on behalf of your brothers and sisters. So could you tell us a little bit about how it's helped you to understand your brother and sister more, and also if this creative process has helped them and their condition and helped them to understand it more? And I find also that dynamic with your sister's daughter quite fascinating. Also.
Yeah, I can talk about that too. So it was really like a two-step process. The documentary helped trigger certain elements, and then the VR other things. So in the documentary film, as I mentioned really briefly, having the camera there allowed me to ask questions that I never would have asked like my siblings before, and it allowed me to stay in situations that would have been extremely uncomfortable. So the camera really opened up the dialogue. It also really rekindled my relationship with my brother, because my brother, when my sister had her first psychotic episode, my brother had been bipolar for 10 years. I didn't know, and I realized after that I knew nothing about what this condition was and how it actually worked. So I sort of had really developed a fear and really just pushed my brother away. I couldn't handle it. But then when my sister got sick as well, I was like, whoa, like what's happening in the family? So filming with my brother helped us rebuild a relationship, and it really helped me humanize him, and then it helped me kind of separate what belonged to the disorder and what belonged to the brother. So, because it's really challenging. You think that there's things that they do when they're manic that they want to do, and they do it and they have control, but no, they lose control. And sometimes there are losses of memory. So in Psychosis, you can do things that you won't even remember, and it was often the cases with my siblings. So it was extremely powerful for them to, for the first time, to see themselves from the outside, like to see themselves in a psychotic episode. Like there's a scene in the film where my brother throws knives, and for him it was part of his mission. It totally made sense. But when he watched the film, he was like, wow, that's not at all my experience of what was going on. And it kind of like brought him back to earth, and he was like, whoa, okay, it gives me a new perspective on my state, and it really wants me to I want to find balance now, and I want to get better. And for my sister as well, when she saw that scene with her daughter, Fatima, it really shook her to the core, because for the first time she was really seeing how her daughter was being affected by her condition, and that was challenging. So at that point, she really wanted to stabilize and to get on the treatment. It can take some time for people who have bipolar to accept the medication. I mean, who wants to take medication for the rest of their lives? It's challenging. And then who wants to lose the mania, which is magical and sometimes. So just to accept to take medication can be a process. It can take time. But the film really helped them see that, okay, there's a problem. We have to do something about it. But then in the context also of my father, and then coming to terms with who my father was and what he did, and he himself had bipolar disorder, and his father had bipolar disorder, so it was definitely like this spell or this vicious cycle cast over the family. The film helped really like map that out and say, okay, what do we do now? And it really starts with the other generation, which is my niece, Felicia's daughter. Education, explaining to her what mania is. She's like 6 years old in that scene, and she knows what mania is because we explained it to her. But when I was growing up, nobody told me that my father had a disorder, that he was sick. We thought it was his personality. We thought everybody, we thought it was normal, which is a problem. It's not normal. If you think it's normal, then you don't get treatment. So yeah, I don't know if that answers a bit. But in ManicVR, I think after going through really the big challenges of making the film, ManicVR was a really fun process because there was a lot of exploration. Like I said, with the documentary, I was stuck with what I had. You can be creative, and there are some more experimental passages in the film, but you're still kind of stuck unless you do animation. But with VR, we could really sort of just try to be really creative and explode the boundaries. And my siblings found that really exciting as well.
Thank you very much for the very touching presentation. And I just want to ask you, the ManicVR was like the second part of your work, like of the Dysmania team. And I just want to ask you if you are preparing the third part, or because like because this is like VR, and I think it's very touching, very good for people to understand what the bipolar thing is, and it's very hard to understand. And I was really, and the second part of my question is, you are just you want to show the men, like this mania thing what your siblings have, and I just want to ask you if you want to care about the other parts of the bipolar disorder, like how they can see, because it's more about the more feeling than the hallucination, and I could see like this VR is very about the hallucination. Thank you very much for the answer.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I really understand your question. So the third part, I don't know. I guess for me the third part was, and that kind of ties into the previous question, was showing it. Because then you spend so much time making it, and then you show it, and what's going to be the response, which can be very nerve-wracking when you're making such a personal documentary. You're exposing yourself, and then you're exposing your family. But it was extremely cathartic to share the film and to see people's reactions. And my siblings would come often to the screenings and have people come to them and hug them and shake their hands and share their stories. And it was like, for the first time, people were talking about mental health in their families, because it's so hard to find the right outlet to discuss. We don't have a lot of like public spheres where we can go out and do that. So the film was also cathartic for them to tell their stories and to help others. But so for me, that was kind of like the third step, sharing it and bringing it to people who are concerned and people who know nothing about it. But what's your conception of the, what would be the third part for you?
Second thing is the VR. If you want to continue to, if you want to continue to describe the more thing about the mania disorder, or is it still your topic, or I'm just curious about your
after
future.
like spending so much years of my life in this, I'm working on two other things that are kind of separate but always connected. But if I do something else, obviously, because both projects focus a lot on crisis. There's not a lot of, we're not focusing on treatment here. So the treatment happened in the aftermath of presenting the film and reconnecting and everything. But it would be nice to do something creative that addresses, okay, now what do you do with the crisis? How do you solve the crisis? Which is the hardest part, I think. But there is some people all around the world that are doing some very creative and interesting approaches to treat mental health. So that could be something. I'll get back to you. But what was the other question? You had something else, or was that it?
Because you're like you're focusing on the mania of your siblings, but if I saw like there are so many different types of this type of the disorder.
So are you talking like, because I showed like, so the experience is supposed to map out the different stages, so like euthymia, hypomania, mania, psychosis, depression.
No, I'm
so
just thinking like, because like my friend, she's got bipolar disorder, but she doesn't have it like so strong with the hallucination.
Okay, so
and
like
I just saw the VR is very strong in the like, but I'm more talking about the feelings, like if
so are you talking like, because like there's bipolar type 2, which is they don't necessarily have
thank you.
It could be interesting. My like personal, I wanted to start from like what I felt I knew, which was bipolar type 1. So I don't have any projects right now to explore others, but maybe we'll see.
Yeah, thank you.
So we are running out of time, so thank you very much, and thank you, Kalina.
Thank you.